The works of God are always persecuted. And that, dear listeners, is a quote from Sister Lucia, the last Fatima visionary. Today, as I continue with part 3 of my unique timeline on the Fatima Prophecies, the last part, part 2, concluded by explaining that in late 1940, it occurred to two of Sister Lucia's superiors that a hybrid act, meaning a world consecration with a special mention of Russia, instead of the collegial consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, could be expedient. It was not the first time that the idea of changing Heaven's request had arisen. It was, however, the first time that Lucia was ordered to modify Our Lady's command and to personally write the Pope, rather than ask her bishop on her behalf to do so. Due to this troubling order, Lucia spent hours in prayer asking for heavenly guidance. On October the 22nd, 1940, our Lord did respond to her, as I also mentioned in the last broadcast. And among other things, he did say that the tribulation will continue and augment. However, he said, too, I will punish the nations for their crimes by war, famine, and persecution of my church, and this will weigh especially upon my vicar on earth. Here comes the promise, though, that he makes. His Holiness will obtain an abbreviation of these days of tribulation if he takes heed of my wishes by promulgating the act of consecration of the whole world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, with a special mention of Russia, unquote. Now, I do want you to remember, this is not as though our Lord is changing his mind. This has to do with what I said in the previous episode in regard to another Portuguese visionary. Okay, and in fact, I mentioned in the last 2 episodes. So if you missed them or you've forgotten, you might want to hear those again. Now, you may also recall that in the last broadcast, I also said that the forthcoming part of the chronology is for 3 main reasons vital for all Catholics to know. That is, if they want to fully grasp the Fatima history of decades. Why? It's because it appears that there exist individuals or even organizations that want these pertinent missing facts swept well under the rug, if not thrown completely out the window. I'm speaking specifically of the years 1942 through 1952, where, for example, in EWTN's online, quote, consecration timeline, unquote, that's the name of the article, among other historical misinformation, a telling 10-year gap appears. Now, they're not the only ones who do this, but I'm pointing it out to you that this missing information of 10 years, an entire decade, prove that, number one, Lucia's consistent testimony verified that the acts of Pope Pius XII in 1942 and 1952 did not fulfill the Virgin Queen's 1929 command. Number two, reason deducts that Lucia's same declarations apply to the later acts of Pope John Paul II, who publicly stated that he was renewing the act of his predecessor, Pius XII. And of course, these would also extend to the acts of Paul VI during the Vatican II Council and Francis. And finally, number 3. Already it was evident that men of the Church were not averse to tinkering with commands from God and doing with them what they willed. Before going any further, I want to tell you that you may observe that my voice or my breathing sounds a little unusual. And you might hear me cough a little bit. I'll try really hard not to do that. And that's because yesterday I was diagnosed with bronchial pneumonia. I came down sick Monday. And I thought if I rested a day or 2, I'd feel better, but I did not get better. So I'm requesting also your prayers for a complete recovery. Yes, I'm on a few medications and on bed rest, although I'm sitting up on the edge of the bed to make this recording for you. And the reason I'm doing that is because I made a promise years ago to Our Lady that if she helped me survive an illness that could have taken my life, that I would work even harder to spread the Fatima message. And so even though I do keep getting hit with illnesses, or we have other sometimes important things happen in our family, like surgeries and so on and so forth, I'm doing my best to keep on with it. And so that is another reason why I would ask for your prayers too. So although I'm a day late with episode 57, I'm going ahead with it now. And finally, I want to tell you that this episode will be a little bit longer, but I promise I'll make it worth your while. So let's continue with part 3. October 24th, 1940. Now answered by our Lord, Lucia penned the letter to the Pope. Ever prudent and mindful of the obedience due to her immediate superiors, she explained to Father Gonzalez, quote, I wanted to send it directly to the Bishop of Gurza, but I didn't dare to do it without first making it fully known to the Reverend Mother Provincial and the Bishop of Liera, unquote. Therefore, she sent to the Mother Provincial not only the draft of her letter to the Pope, but also the letters of Father Gonzalez ordering her to write it. In this package, she asked Mother Provincial to send the contents to Bishop de Silva, who in turn was requested to send it to Manuel Ferreira, the Bishop of Gurza, the one being the bishop who, with the priest, Father Gonzalez, who was Lucia's, one of her confessors, commanded Lucia to write the Pope and ask for a different kind of consecration. On December the 2nd, 1940, following a model of modifications made by Bishop de Silva to Lucia's original text, Lucia wrote a final copy, which was sent to Pope Pius XII. Tragically, the directives of the two bishops mutilated and abbreviated the only parts of the secret, the first and second secrets, which were, by this month and year, Sister Lucia was finally allowed to reveal. To cite just a few examples, due to the command for brevity by Bishop Ferreira, Lucia did not include the description of the vision of hell. Bishop de Silva also had Lucia alter Our Lady's words about the worst war in the reign of Pius XI by changing that phrase only to another forthcoming war. And you can see that's quite a difference. It completely ignores the name of the Pope, in which that worst war would begin, which completes the prophecy and certainly makes it, it should have made it so much more important and worthwhile, worthy of note. But it was ignored at the time, and even here, in writing to Pius XII, who already knew about this anyway, the words are changed. The latter bishop further suppressed the conclusion, which was the unconditional announcement of the final triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, which is the precious pearl of the great secret of Fatima. 2 years later, however, the Pope would learn of those words. December 8th, 1940, at the personal request of Sister Lucia, made with Bishop de Silva's permission, the Portuguese bishops met at the Cathedral of Lisbon to solemnly renew their earlier consecrations of their nation to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And it was also an act of thanksgiving for God's protection via the Virgin's intercession, especially during the terrible 1936 communist revolution in neighboring Spain. And as I mentioned in the last episode, it would also protect them from any involvement in World War II. On December 16, 1940, in a letter to Father Eperico, Sister Lucia aptly summed up all that had occurred with the letter that she was commanded to write the Pope. And notice how, again, prudently she writes this, says it succinctly and truthfully. Quote, I have been ordered to write a letter to His Holiness Pius XII, explaining Our Lady's request on the consecration of the world and Russia to her Immaculate Heart. I obeyed on October the 24th, 1940. I have been ordered to write a second letter with some small modifications. I wrote it on December the 2nd, 1940. In that same letter, His Grace the Bishop, meaning of Liera, ordered me. And then she continues with the orders and what transpired, etc. Unquote. In another place, Lucia presented her second copy as the final copy of the bishop's draft, meaning Bishop de Silva's draft, which offers further proof that what was sent to Pope Pius XII was not her original text. By the way, there are a few actions that you can take right now, and they're totally free. It's free to subscribe to Genesis 315. It's free to like each of our episodes as you listen to them, and it's free to share any episode that you hear with at least one family member or friend. Every time you do so, you help us distribute the whole truth about Fatima. Word of mouth on the depths of the message of Our Lady of Fatima, the crown of all Marian apparitions approved by the Church, is one of the easiest ways to spread our Holy Mother's message because it is intended for all of us. To continue. On this next section, I will be discussing the First World Consecration and finally the command for Lucia to write down the third secret. On the evening of October the 31st, 1942, for the closing of the Jubilee of the Fatima apparitions, in Portugal, the people gathered to hear a radio message from the Supreme Pontiff. In it, Pope Pius XII, alone, without the participation of the Catholic bishops around the world, consecrated to the Immaculate Heart, quote, the Church and the world, unquote. Neither Russia nor the 5 first Saturdays of repertory devotion were explicitly mentioned. So these are the words from the consecration itself. Quote, Queen of the Most Holy Rosary, help of Christians, and refuge of the human race, conqueror in all the great battles of God, we humbly prostrate ourselves as supplicants before thy throne, certain of obtaining mercy and finding grace and opportune help in the present calamity. To you, to your Immaculate Heart in this tragic hour of human history, we confide, we consecrate, we deliver, not only Holy Church, the mystical body of your Jesus, which bleeds and suffers in so many parts and is in so much tribulation, but also the whole world, torn by mortal discord, burning in the fires of hate, victim of its own iniquity. Unquote. Now those are beautiful words, but if only he had at least done what our Lord said when he was consecrating to the Immaculate Heart. He should have said not the Holy Church, the mystical body, but he should have said what our Lord asked of him specifically, and then a special mention of Russia. And of course, it would have been even better because he knew from his time as the Vatican Secretary what was actually needed, but that was not done. So this happened again on October the 31st, 1942. At some point in November of 42, Lucia wrote to one of her superiors these words, with anguish I await His Holiness's order to the bishops, and then the grace of peace for the poor world. Unquote. In fact, that's the last line of a letter from Sister Lucia to Bishop Ferreira, who had been Sister Lucia's spokesman with the Portuguese bishops. Earlier in July of 42, it was he who convinced his fellow bishops to send the new petition to the Holy Father. February 28, 1943. Because certain people, inflamed by true facile and enthusiasm, were already announcing Russia's imminent conversion, Sister Lucia reminded Bishop Ferreira in a letter that the 1942 act of Pius XII was, quote, incomplete, unquote, and the, quote, conversion of Russia is not for now, unquote. Her exact words, quote, the good Lord has already shown me his contentment with the act, although incomplete according to his desire, meaning his desire for the collegial consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, performed by the Holy Father and several bishops. He promises in return to end the war soon. The conversion of Russia is not for now, unquote. So again, nota bene. From the time of the radio consecration in 1942, the terrible war did not cease until the end of 1945, and how many millions of people had died in battles and camps, in blitzes all over Europe, and with a total of 2 successive atomic bombs dropped on 2 Japanese civilian cities. I pointed this out years ago, and I am so glad that other people are paying attention to what I said in that regard, as well as in other things, because even though people knew it, it's like they didn't put 2 and 2 together, that if the consecration had been done in time, none of those terrible things would have happened. None of it. And Russia, which was then one of the allies, would not have ended up going into a Cold War with the rest of the countries, and all of their people would not have starved, and so on and so forth. All of the evils that could have been prevented if only the consecration had been done in time, even at this late hour of 1942. Now, since June of 1943, Lucia began to suffer a succession of serious illnesses, including pleurisy. The bishop, hesitating for months to make any decisions in regard to having her write down the last part of the Great Secret, began to fear Lucia's death before she could do so. So by mid-October of 1943, finally, Bishop de Silva personally went to visit Sister Lucia to ascertain her health for himself. And at this point, he was alarmed. And so he, again, finally ordered Lucia to write down the third secret. For the next 2 months, Lucia, who was always so quick and efficient in her charity and obedience, struggled to follow this command. She would later say it was not a natural circumstance. So as a result, she again prayed and prayed fervently for heaven's assistance. On January 2nd, 1944, Our Lady appeared to Sister Lucia, who was still struggling to commit to paper the third secret. And she told her, quote, "Be at peace and write what I have commanded you, but not, however, that which has been given to you to understand its meaning," unquote. 2 notes on this. In another book, the words here are changed to make it sound as though don't give the meaning that you think that it has. Something to that effect, which is absolutely not true. Those words have been changed from the Portuguese to the English, again, to hide facts from us. And number 2, we can see that Our Lady was giving Lucia assistance in writing down this third secret, which frightened her so badly that she couldn't even write the entire thing down at one go. First she said, "Write what I have commanded you, but not that which has been given to you to understand its meaning." So we have both words to that third secret, and we have a vision. And as we all know, we at least have part of the vision, which was given to us well over 22 years ago. But we still do not have the words of Our Lady, the complete words of Our Lady to the third secret. June 17th, 1944, the third secret came into the possession of Bishop de Silva. It had taken so long because Sister Lucia insisted on personally hand-delivering both her notebook, which she was using to write a diary under obedience to the bishop, and a letter to Bishop Ferreira, who directly took it to Bishop de Silva. So let me make myself clear. She hand-delivered the notebook and the letter to Bishop Ferreira. They weren't intended for him, but he took them directly to Bishop de Silva. Father Alonso, who was the official Fatima archivist, affirmed at the time that the bishop could have immediately read the third secret and revealed it as he saw fit. Canon Galamba, who was advisor to Bishop de Silva, revealed that when the bishop refused to open the letter, Lucia, at Our Lady's direction, made him promise that it would definitely be opened and read to the world either at her death or in 1960, whichever came first. And by the way, that was a quote from Canon Galamba. December the 8th, 1945. The bishop, after the Vatican rejected his attempts to relieve himself of the third secret by offering to send it to Rome, placed Lucia's envelope, sealed with wax, in a larger envelope, and he sealed it. The bishop wrote instructions, signed and dated, on the larger envelope. Quote, "This envelope, with its contents, will be delivered to His Eminence Cardinal Don Manuel, Patriarch of Lisbon, after my death," unquote. This fact and others prove that the third secret, like the first 2 secrets, was entrusted to Lucia's bishop and not to a reigning pope. And in fact, if you look on the internet, you would even be able to find the picture of Lucia's bishop with the larger envelope in front of him and the writing on it. So again, this is further historical proof that the third secret, like the first 2 secrets, were entrusted to Lucia's bishop and not just to a reigning pope. They were never really intended for the pope. That unfortunately came about because of the decisions of men in the church, including those who didn't want to handle the responsibility that they did have, and others who would take it because they wanted to keep it hidden away. By the way, you're listening to Genesis 3:15. I will put enmities between thee and the woman, and thy seed and her seed. She shall crush thy head, and thou shalt lie in wait for her heel. I'm your hostess, Mariana Bartold, the author of Fatima, The Signs and Secrets, and Guadalupe, Secrets of the Image, both which are available at Amazon. February 3rd, 1946, Sister Lucia confirmed to Father Hubert Jongen, who was a Montfort father, quote, "In the letter which I wrote by order of my spiritual directors to the Holy Father in 1940, I exposed the exact request of Our Lady. I also asked for the consecration of the world with a special mention of Russia. The exact request of Our Lady was that the Holy Father consecrate Russia to her Immaculate Heart, ordering that this be made at the same time and in union with him by all the bishops of the Catholic world," unquote. So there we have one of many confirmations from Lucia of what was needed for the consecration, both before and after the later consecrations of Paul VI, John Paul II, and so on. In July 15th, actually, 1946, there took place Lucia's interview with William Thomas Walsh, and it was later published in his 1947 book, Our Lady of Fatima. And he asked her, "Have you had any revelation from Our Lady about the end of the world?" Lucia prudently said, "I cannot answer that question." Walsh also related, quote, "Finally, we came to the important subject of the second July secret, of which so many different and conflicting versions have been published. Lucia made it plain that Our Lady did not ask for the consecration of the world to her Immaculate Heart. What she demanded specifically was the consecration of Russia. She did not comment, of course, on the fact that Pope Pius XII had consecrated the world, not Russia, to the Immaculate Heart in 1942. But she said more than once and with deliberate emphasis, quote, "What Our Lady wants is that the Pope and all the bishops in the world shall consecrate Russia to her Immaculate Heart on one special day. If this is done, she will convert Russia, and there will be peace. If it is not done, the errors of Russia will spread through every country in the world," unquote. October 17th through the 18th, 1946, Canon Casimir Barthas questioned Lucia about the third secret. He later testified that both she and the bishop said it would be released in 1960, adding, quote, "And when I pushed my audacity so far as to ask why it was necessary to wait until then, the only response from either one was, 'Because the Blessed Virgin wishes it so,' unquote." March 25th, 1948. With the intercession of Pope Pius XII, Lucia transferred from the Dorothean nuns to the Carmel of Coimbra. December 15th, 1951. In a letter to a friend, Sister Lucia wrote, "Our Lady's request concerning Russia has not been done. According to what, name redacted, told me, the bishops of Russia sent a petition to the Holy Father asking for the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, such as Our Lady requested. May God grant that this actually is true and that everything comes to pass. But it is a little late. Patience," unquote. The day after a pilgrimage to Fatima, Father Wetter, Society of Jesus, rector of the Rusicum, came to the Carmel of Coimbra, accompanied by Bishop Meletif, a converted Russian bishop, and a seminarian, Pavel Blitzenov. During the audience, Sister Lucia asked Father Wetter, quote, "Are you able to pass on to the Holy Father the message that what Our Lady of Fatima requested has not yet been done?" Unquote. Father Wetter said yes, and a witness living at the Rusicum affirmed that Father Wetter kept his word. May 1952. Our Lady appeared to Sister Lucia, saying, Make it known to the Holy Father that I am always awaiting the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart. Without the consecration, Russia will not be able to convert, nor will the world have peace." Unquote. This message was received by Pius XII in June of 1952. And then, unbeknownst to Lucia, Pius was making a plan of his own, because on July 7th, 1952, which is the date of Pius XII's apostolic letter Sacro Virgente Anno, which states, quote, "We consecrate, and in a most special manner we entrust all the peoples of Russia to this Immaculate Heart," unquote. Okay, a few bits of commentary here. Note that, number one, an apostolic letter is not a public and solemn act of consecration, which in my book and in my writing for years I have gone out of my way to define. And again, that is also getting picked up by other Fatima people because it needs to be. The Church knows what a consecration entails. The consecration is a solemn act in which a person, a place, or thing is set aside for a special service, a holy purpose for God. So this apostolic letter did not fit that bill. Number two, the world's bishops had no participation in the apostolic letter, which had not been pre-announced and for which no preparations had been made in Rome or any of the Catholic world's dioceses. Three, the object of the consecration was the peoples of Russia, rather than simply Russia. And no, that isn't hair-splitting. That's called obedience. And number four, there was no promise of a near future act of papal reparation or promulgation of the 5 first Saturdays of Ocean. Shortly after July 7th, 1952, Sister Lucia stated in a letter, "I am pained that it has still not been done as Our Lady required it. Patience. Let us hope that Our Lady will deign to accept it as a good mother," unquote. And on that particular sentence, something has to be said, because Lucia said things like that before, and she would say them again later after the acts of Pope John Paul II, including the supposed words that it was accepted. Well, yes, we know that they are accepted as such for what they were, but they were not accepted as fulfilling God's requirements, what he had asked for, very succinctly, very simply, very clearly in regard to this collegial consecration of Russia. And that is something to remember as we move forward in this chronology. Our Lady accepts it. God accepts these acts, but not, again, for what they were supposed to be. And so because they did not do as they were specifically told, the promises made by God, the blessings that will come from God, are not going to be bestowed upon this world until he is obeyed. We will get some benefits, as we always have in the past, including putting the time off even further, possibly bringing us to the 100-year timeline that I've already indicated is probably June 13th, 2029. And even now, we are still on that countdown. All right, to continue, though, with the 1950s, as I was finishing that up, September the 2nd, 1952, Father Joseph Schweigel, he was also of the Society of the Jesuits, upon his return from an important mission given to him by Pope Pius XII to interrogate Sister Lucia about the third secret and other unfulfilled parts of the Fatima message, was briefly questioned by a curious colleague who happened to be a relative about the third secret. And so Father Schweigel responded in this manner, quote, "I cannot reveal anything of what I learned at Fatima concerning the third secret, but I can say that it has 2 parts. One concerns the Pope. The other, logically, although I can say nothing, would have to be the continuation of the words, 'In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved,'" unquote. And so there you have it again. 2 parts of the third secret. One part has to do with the continuation of Our Lady's words, and one part has to do with the Pope. We see something happening to a Holy Father and or a bishop dressed in white in that third secret vision. These 2 people might be 2 separate people. They might be one person. But for some reason, the Lucia only described them this person or persons in the way that she did, saying, "We saw a bishop dressed in white. We thought it was the Holy Father." I've discussed that in one of my earlier episodes about a bishop dressed in white when I gave my original hypothesis, which was published in 2008, of who I think is this bishop dressed in white, especially after the papal abdication or alleged abdication of Pope Benedict XVI. That hypothesis of mine really did spread throughout the Catholic world. So you might want to look that up underneath the Genesis 315 playlist also. And so now we reach May 13th, 1955, when Cardinal Giovanni, Pro-Secretary of the Holy Office, interrogated Lucia about the third secret, including the 1960 disclosure date, and asked her, "Why this date?" And she answered, "Because it will appear clearer." Now, in the next episode of this series, my chronology will continue with the Virgin Mary and Sister Lucia silenced, coming up on the 1960s, and the very famous interview of Sister Lucia made in 1957 by Father Fuentes, who was then preparing to become the postulator for the causes of canonization of her two younger cousins. Before signing off, please allow me to provide one last reminder to ask you to please subscribe if you haven't done so, like this episode, and share it with your family and friends. And so, my friends, until the next time, may God bless you, and may Our Lady Mary keep you and yours under her starry mantle. Salve Regina.